I caught my first carp some 40 years ago, and back then I was using a little size 12 and 2 grains of corn, and it was a very successful method. 20 years ago, when I got back into my fishing, I was used to using small hooks, size 8s and size 10s. As the years went on, my hook sizes became bigger because I was fishing for bigger fish, and it seemed to be the modern trend was to fish with larger and larger hook. By the time I came to France some 12 years ago, I was used to fishing with size 4s, and the Corda Wide Gape X was my hook of choice, my go-to option. Now I was hand sharpening those to get a really kind of long, fine point, because out the packet they just weren't quite good enough. I did experiment with using the size 6 version of those hooks, but I had one or two actually open out on me, just while carp fishing, and I wasn't putting a huge amount of pressure on the fish. It was an open water situation, and I was quite surprised to see, I landed the fish. I didn't actually lose any, but the hook was visibly opened out after the fight. So I went back to the size 4s because I just didn't think that a size 6 was strong enough. A few years ago, I started experimenting with the Nash pinpoint range of hooks, specifically the shod twisters and the twisters. What I found is that the size 6 version of those hooks is immensely strong. I can do a deadlift test on those and they hardly budge, and that's an 8 kilo weight that I can pick up, and there's a couple of mil of gaping, but they spring back. These are enormously strong hooks. They're also very, very sharp out of the packet. Because the size 6s were so immensely strong, good enough for massive catfish strong, I wanted to experiment and go back to a smaller size. I wanted to go back to a size 8, something that I was more comfortable fishing with 20 years ago. I wanted to see, well, is a size 8 in the pinpoint range strong enough for 30s, 40s and even 50s. If you look closely at the difference between a size 8 pinpoint hook and a size 4 wide gape X from Corda, there are some big differences. The first thing to notice is the wire diameter. The Corda Wide Gape X in a size 4 is made from a wire that is 1.2 millimeters diameter, whereas the Nash pinpoint is made from a wire that's 0.9 of a millimeter diameter. Now 1.2 minus 0.9, that's 0.3. Now 0.3, does it sound like a lot? Well, no, but if you look at that in percentage terms, that's 25% thinner. So why does being thinner matter? Well, I've looked at some medical research papers looking at the science of hypodermic needle design, and the physics behind this says that a 25% thinner needle requires 25% less force to actually puncture the skin, and that's a big difference. So in fishing terms, what it means is that the carp would have to pull 25% more in order to hook himself up on the size 4 wide gape X, or 25% less on the size 8 Nash pinpoint. We can also see big differences in the actual point design itself. Now, I'm not talking about the fact that one is a straight point and one is a beaked point. That's pretty obvious. But there's an actual difference in the geometry of the point. One is actually much finer than the other. And if I offer up the size 8 Nash and place that between the jaws, that hook point visibly protrudes far farther than the size 4 wide gape X. This means that the size 8 Nash hook is a lot sharper, and that point is going to go in further for the same amount of hooking force. This means that the carp is going to find it far harder to eject the rig, and it also means it's less likely that the carp is going to fall off on its journey right to your landing net. So with a finer point hook, you're more likely to be playing the carp from the bend of the hook, and the bend of the hook is actually the strongest point of the hook. Over the years, I've fished with all of these brands of hooks, and they all have their merits. So far, the only hooks that I've ever tried that have that combination of strength, wire gauge and fineness of point are the Nash pinpoint range. Most brands of hooks can be sharpened to be as sharp as the pinpoint or even sharper. If you do know of a brand of hooks that are as sharp as the pinpoints, then do let me know, because I'd be really interested. When I've been at the lake fishing for my own fish, I've been using the long shanks in a size 8, and I've found them phenomenally effective. Super sharp out the packet, because a smaller size of hook means a finer gauge, and a finer gauge is just a sharper hook. It's that simple. In terms of strength, I was obviously worried about whether a size 8 would be strong enough to bank, really large, really angry carp, especially when I have to, really give them some stick to control them during the fight. And I've had zero issues, no failures, no flexing, no bending out, so hook to land ratio is definitely in the kind of 98% range, something like that, which is very strong. So some of you might have watched my video on carp hooks, and I said, well, I don't use long shanks, and I haven't done for years because I had problems with them. So one of the reasons for revisiting long shanks was because I did have this problem with them, and I wanted to see whether I still have this problem the way I'm fishing today. And the good news is that I've been using these hooks with zero issues. The size 8 long shank is only actually a couple of mil longer in overall length to my normal size 6 twisters. One of my concerns with the long shank hooks is that eye of the hook is poking out of the mouth after a capture, but because I'm fishing barbless, as soon as the carp comes into the net, I unhook the carp immediately. So the hook is only in the mouth during the fight, and it's only in the carp net for 10-20 seconds, just while I kind of put the rod down and get that hook out. So I'm reducing as much as possible the risk of a long shank hook causing mouth damage by being caught in the net, because it's not in the net for very long at all. If you want to use long shanks, if you keep to a small size and you use barbless so that you get the hook out the way as quickly as possible, then for me they're a very safe option. Just be careful which patterns you choose, because some might be up to the task more than others. I've hardly had to use any mouth antiseptic on the hook holds this year. Most of the time I can't even see where the hook hold was, because they are that clean. So if at the moment you're using large hooks and maybe sharpening them to get a finer point, then a shift to a smaller hook, you can use them out the packet. It's going to save you time, it's going to save you the risk of getting your hook sharpening wrong, and it's something that has been working really well for me as I've been having a great season.